Cuba is resolutely opposing the U.S. sanctions and pressure against North Korea and expressing full support for the just steps of North Korea in bolstering up defense capabilities including ICBM test fires. We express our deep thanks to the Korean people who are sending solidarity to the Cuban people's just cause. That was Ulises Rosales del Toro, Stalinist Cuba's vice president of the Council of Ministers, i.e. eunuch apparatchik, conveying his master's Raul Castro's support to Kim Jong-nam, Stalinist North Korea's president of the Presidium of the Supreme People's Assembly, another eunuch apparatchik. The shout-out between these Stalinist eunuchs took place this week in Tehran during Iran's presidential inauguration ceremonies. Powwow among terrorists, murderers, burglars, which also included Zimbabwe's president, witch-doctor dictator Robert Mugabe. The event was reported by Stalinist North Korea's press propaganda ministry. The Cuban party, government and people are always sided with the Workers' Party of Korea, Korean government, and Korean people. Cuba and Korea are located far from one another, but are fighting in the same trench of continuing the joint struggle against imperialism. Kim Jong-un, July 5, 2016. Talk is cheap, of course, and declarations of friendship and support rank among the cheapest, especially among diplomats, professional liars. Alas, whatever else you might say about these mass-murdering, terror-sponsoring regimes, Cuba and North Korea's vows of love and support have proven inviolate for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health. We're not talking a typical celebrity marriage here. Barely a year ago, for instance, Raul Castro welcomed North Korea's General Kim Yong-chol, officially known as Vice Chairman of the Workers' Party of Korea Central Committee and Director of Reconnaissance General Bureau RGB. In brief, he heads North Korea's spy and cyber warfare services. He's roughly equivalent to our CIA director. According to the Pentagon, North Korea's Reconnaissance General Bureau RGB is responsible for clandestine operations. The RGB includes 6 bureaus charged with operations, reconnaissance, technology and cyber, overseas intelligence, inter-Korean talks, and service support. The RGB also oversees Bureau 121, North Korea's nefarious cyber warfare agency, as reported on May 25, 2016 by Capitol Hill. Cubans a few months before North Korea's intelligence chief visited Havana, in fact at precisely the time President Obama was in Havana doing the wave at a baseball game with Raul Castro. The Castro regime signed a confidential military cooperation and intelligence sharing agreement with North Korea. My dream is to drop 3 atomic bombs on New York City. Raul Castro, June 1960. What Khrushchev gasped on October 28, 1962, as recalled by his son Sergei. Is he Fidel Castro proposing that we start a nuclear war, that we launch missiles from Cuba apparently, but that is insane? Remove our missiles as soon as possible before it's too late. Before something terrible happens, commanded the Soviet premier. So much for the gallant Knights of Camelot forcing the Russians' retreat during the Cuban Missile Crisis. In fact, the Castro brothers and Che Guevara's genocidal lust is what prompted the Butcher of Budapest to yank the missiles from their reach, and Che Guevara agrees if the missiles had remained in Cuba, we would have fired them against the very heart of the U.S., including New York City. Che Guevara, November 1962. Raul and his Cuban Stalinist chums must be reminiscing this week. The good old days, though the exhilarating memory of almost incinerating millions of Americans and Russians and Cubans has faded somewhat. Castro and his chums have probably still been gloating this week in view of their not inconsiderable role in the Korean missile crisis. You see, amigos, North Korea's nuclear missile system probably owes much to the Castro regime. In July 2013, a North Korean ship full of Cuban weapons including jet planes and missiles was caught red-handed trying to cross the Panama Canal. But don't take it from me, some say that the North Korean ship's cargo was linked to the state's North Korea's nuclear ambitions, pointing to indications that surface-to-air missile systems found on board were designed to defend its North Korea's fledgling nuclear program. Take it from the Christian Science Monitor. Not exactly a Cuban exile scandal sheet. A nuclear weapons capability has to be viewed from a complete system perspective, explains Graham Ongweb. Gosh, that doesn't sound like a Cuban exile name. Research fellow at the S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies in Singapore. Gosh, that's not Miami, and the place doesn't sound like a bunker of crackpot, embittered right-wing Cuban exiles trying to crank up a war with Cuba so they can reclaim their ill-gotten casinos, sugar plantations and borderlos in order to have a full-fledged nuclear capability. Continue News Mr. Ongweb, you have to have real system to protect assets. Characteristically, at the time of this major international scandal, Town Hall was enlightening its readers with this vital story of arms smuggling by the terror sponsor on our doorstep, a story pretty much blacked out by the fake news media. Their Cuban news bureaus, you see, would have been imperiled by reporting something so disdainful of those who bestow the visas for those news bureaus. Two surface-to-air missile systems recovered from Chongchong-gang, the SA-2 and SA-3, could have been used by North Korea to guard nuclear production, storage, and missile sites, Mr. Ongweb testified. The role of the SA-2 and SA-3 is very simple: to take down incoming U.S. probably fighter aircraft that can strafe and destroy these sites or bomb them.